begin the dismantling operation, place the 150 Li in position on the bench or ramp. Remove side panels. To remove the right-hand footboard, remove the two nuts fixing this to the frame, one of the screws fixing the connecting piece between leg shield and frame, and the two screws fixing the footboard bracket. Remove the silencer by freeing the clamp holding the engine exhaust tube to the silencer body and removing the three nuts fixing body to crankcase. Remove oil drain plug, collecting the oil in a tray. Remove clutch cable from the clutch lever on the crankcase. The crankcase cover can now be removed by unscrewing the remaining 13 nuts. To remove the washers rapidly, we suggest the use of a magnet. Now you can see the inside of the crankcase. We have the chain sprocket with its torque limitator and the chain with its guides. The chain transmits the power to the outer clutch bell through a second torque limitator. To dismantle the clutch, the proper tool must be used. Compress the springs, remove the circlip, slide out the clutch discs. The power is transmitted through the clutch discs to the inner clutch bell, which is splined directly to the gear primary shaft. To remove the inner clutch bell locking nut, the bell must be held by the appropriate tool. With the help of the extractor, remove the inner clutch bell, then the outer clutch bell. The needle bearing and the shims. The gearbox group is situated behind this flange. Remove chain guides by unscrewing the two fixing screws and then the chain. Having removed the 6 fixing screws, withdraw the gear group support flange by means of two 6mm by 1 bolts screwed into the 2 threaded holes and inserting a screwdriver between the flange and the crankcase. The low-speed gear has a series of dogs on its face to mesh with the kickstart shaft pivoted on the crankcase cover. As you can see, the cover can be replaced by another, as there is no specified fitting relationship between this and the crankcase. The primary gears are always in constant mesh with the lay shaft gears, which are moved to the required position on the lay shaft. which acts also as a rear wheel stub axle, by means of a cursor-type sleeve controlled by this lever. Now the rear of the machine must be lifted onto a stand which can be of this type. To remove the rear hub, proceed first with the removal of the wheel rim. Then, after removing the hub locking nut, withdraw the hub by means of the extractor. Now, to remove the lay stub axle shaft, it is sufficient to tap it with a mallet on the wheel side. To remove the shock absorber, unscrew these two nuts. We now remove the engine rebound buffer from the crankcase and support the crankcase by means of a rod placed through the shock absorber attachment pins so that the cylinder head is in its lowest position. Remove the left-hand footboard by unscrewing the 5 nuts and the screw fixing the connecting piece. Loosen the carburetor fixing screws, choke cable adjuster and filter hose clip. Release throttle cable and remove carburetor with filter and hose. Having removed the spark plug and unscrewed the fixing screws, the cylinder cowl is removed. Having unscrewed the cylinder head nuts, remove head and gasket. Then the cylinder. To remove the piston, first take out the gudgeon pin circlip. If the engine is hot, the gudgeon pin can be extracted by means of a punch, pressing this by hand. If the engine is cold, then use the pin extractor. Remove the flywheel cowl by unscrewing the 5 screws. The fan cover is removed by unscrewing the 2 fixing screws or unclipping the circlip, whichever is fitted. Lock the flywheel with the appropriate tool. Unscrew the left-handed lock nut. Then remove the flywheel by means of the extractor. If the timing is correct, it is advisable to mark the position of the stator plate in respect of the flange, so as to avoid retiming on replacing. To remove the stator plate, release the wires on the flywheel low tension socket, then unscrew the 3 fixing screws. To remove the flywheel support flange, unscrew the 3 nuts fixing it to the crankcase. Then withdraw the flange by means of the extractor, using 2 of the 3 screws just removed. Then block the crankshaft. Unscrew the chain drive sprocket fixing bolt, remove the washers, the spring, the sliding dog and the sprocket. The sleeve can then be removed by means of the appropriate puller. shaft, tap the splined end with a mallet on the side. Should the crankcase need to be removed from the frame, it is necessary to unscrew these two nuts. Tap the pin out of its seat with a punch. Having finished the dismantling of the engine, here are the parts which go to make it up. Here we see them illustrated. And here as they are. Now, to begin the reassembly. Replace the crankshaft, inserting it through the crankcase, then tapping it lightly and carefully on the flywheel end so that the drive side fits into the bearing. Fit the chain drive sprocket group complete with the sleeve onto the crankshaft, tightening the locking bolt. Replace the flywheel support flange, tapping it with a mallet to ensure it fits perfectly on its seat. Screw in and tighten the 3 bolts. Now replace the stator plate. If the timing was correct before dismantling, just replace the plate in identically the same position as before. Otherwise, it is necessary to retime the ignition, as will be explained further on. Screw in the 3 fixing screws. Connect wires to the flywheel low tension socket in the proper color sequence. Now fit the flywheel rotor to the crankshaft, taking care that it fits properly onto its key. Lock by tightening the left-handed lock nut using flywheel holding tool. Fitting the piston. It is very important that the 2 ring pegs face the cylinder exhaust ports, and therefore the arrow marked on the piston crown should point towards the exhaust side of the cylinder. Insert the gudgeon pin and fit the 2 circlips. The piston and cylinder are in 3 standard size gradings, plus, 0, and minus, marked according to the grade on the top face of the cylinder and on the piston crown. To have the correct coupling, both cylinder and piston must have the same marking. To insert the piston into the cylinder, use the piston ring clip. Ensure that the gasket has been placed between cylinder and crankcase. At this point, the ignition timing can be carried out if necessary. Check the condition and the gap of the contact points. This gap should be between 0.35 and 0.45 millimeter. If necessary, this can be adjusted through the adjustment screw. Place the TDC dial gauge with its support onto the cylinder in place of the head. Then connect the electric timing tester with one clip to the green HT coil wire and the other to earth. Bring the piston up to its top dead center, adjusting the dial gauge to 0. The timing tester will buzz or light up. Turn the flywheel anti-clockwise until the light goes out or buzzing stops, indicating that the points are closed, which should show a reading on the dial gauge of 0.25 or 0.30 millimeters. Should the point closing occur before or after the above reading, then remove the flywheel rotor and adjust the position of the stator plate until the points close at the correct time. We should like to point out that the flywheel rotates in the opposite direction to that on the LD and TV machines. The flywheel dust cover can now be replaced, fixing it by its 2 screws or by the circlip as the case may be. Replace the flywheel cowl. Replace the cylinder head, remembering to place the metallic gasket between this and the cylinder. Fit the cylinder cowl, securing it by means of its screws. Replace the spark plug and HT lead. Replace the carburetor with filter and hose. Replace left-hand footboard. remove the rod between the shock absorber pins and insert the engine rebound buffer. Replace shock absorber. Fit the cursor selector slide onto the lay stub axle shaft. Replace the selector spring and the two balls. Into the shaft and move the cursor selector until it clicks into position. Replace the shaft into its ball bearing. Fit the cone to the shaft, then the hub, and screw on the hub nut without tightening. Replace the wheel and fix by means of its 4 dome nuts. Assemble the primary shaft and slide on the lay shaft gears in proper sequence. Slide on the needle bearing and replace the gear support flange in perfect alignment in its seat, locking it in position by means of its 6 nuts. Replace the chain together with its guides without tightening the screws. Replace the washer, the outer clutch bell, the needle bearings and the inner clutch bell. Lock the inner bell by means of the appropriate tool. Tighten the nut fixing it to the primary shaft and tighten the chain guide screws. At this point, we carry out the chain alignment check. Unscrew the torque limitator fixing bolt, remove the washer, spring, and dog. The aligning check tool to be used carries an ordinary dial gauge with an extension. Now proceed as follows. Bring the dial gauge point in contact with the chain drive sprocket surface and adjust gauge to 0. Then bring dial gauge point to contact surface of rear chain sprocket. The difference between the two surfaces should not read more than 0.05 millimeters. Should this not be so, it will be necessary to remove the inner clutch bell, add or remove the shims between the clutch bell and the bearing until the correct reading is obtained. Having done this, replace the torque limitator. Assemble the clutch springs, discs and circlip, compressing the springs with the proper tool. Then tighten up in full the rear hub lock nut. Fit the crankcase cover gasket and replace the cover. Connect the clutch cable and withdraw the rear wheel support. Fill the crankcase with oil until this flows from the oil level plug. Now proceed with the assembly of the silencer, followed by the right-hand footboard. We now begin the dismantling of the front suspension and handlebar. Remove the headlamp by unscrewing the 4 fixing screws and disconnecting the wires. You will note that the junction box carries the impedance regulator for the battery charging, which has a fuse incorporated to protect the electric system from any short circuit. Having removed the 2 screws inside the headlamp housing, the 4 on the leg shield and the 2 screws under the mudguard, remove the horn casting and the mudguard. Release the front brake on the wheel. And unscrew the speedo drive. Then, having loosened the front wheel nuts, remove the wheel. To remove the trailing links, unscrew the grease nipples and the 2 screws fixing the rebound buffers. Withdraw the link pin and remove the buffers using a pair of pincers. Then, with the proper tool, compress the suspension springs so that the trailing links can be removed, followed by the spring guide and the springs. Now, unscrew the 2 screws under the handlebar and lift the upper part sufficiently to reach the speedo bulb, and unscrew the knurled nut holding the speedo cable. The speedometer is fixed to the upper part of the handlebar by these 4 screws. Now we can see the inside of the handlebar. We have the clutch cable, the 2 gear change cable wires connected to their pulley, the front brake cable, the throttle cable on its pulley, and the loom containing the wires from the main switch on the handlebar. To slide out the handle grips with the control rod, it is sufficient, after having freed the clutch and brake cables from their other ends, to release the trunnion on the lever and loosen the screw fixing the pulley. To remove the handlebar, release the cables at the other hand grip, remove the fixing bolt and tap underneath with a mallet. Then, with the aid of the proper tools, unscrew the lock ring and cone on the fork. Withdraw the speedo cable and remove the fork. The dismantling of the front suspension and handlebar is thus complete. Now we begin the reassembly. Replace the front fork, inserting the speedo cable screw on the cone to an extent that the fork has no axial play but can rotate freely. Lock the cone with its lock ring. Replace the lower part of the handlebar. Screw the handlebar bolt into the stem. Before replacing the upper part of the handlebar, check that the cables are arranged in this way to avoid chafing or sharp bends when steering. Connect the speedo cable, insert the speedo bulb, and then fit the upper part. Replace the suspension springs, their guides, then with the help of the spring compressor tool, fit the trailing links, rebound buffers, and grease nipples. Now replace the wheel. Connect up the front brake cable and the speedometer drive cable. It is well at this stage to proceed with the greasing of the control cables. Replace the horn casting, mudguard, and lastly the headlamp. To check the battery acid level, unscrew the two nuts fixing the battery support to the frame brackets. Add distilled water until liquid level is about 1/4 of an inch higher than the battery cell separators. This operation should be repeated at least once a month, while in hot weather about every 2 weeks. It is advisable now and again to check that the handlebar fixing bolt is absolutely tight, as well as the wheel nuts. Now replace the panels, and the reassembly is complete. The engine, powerful and elastic, gives an output of 6.5 horsepower. Chain transmission ensures an extremely quiet and smooth functioning. The sliding cursor low revolution type gearbox permits an easy and highly selective gear change. The 10-inch wheels with the specially designed suspension give the machine a stability and safety factors without precedence. Here you have the 150 Li, the speedy, elegant, and economic scooter.